I want to get your take on the LCS broadcast this year, Papa,
Hmm.
and because you've been a part of OGN,
Hmm.
LCK, moving into now working with Riot directly on the LCS and seeing many years of LCS broadcasts. You've watched 10 years of broadcasts around the world. So, what do you think about the changes that LCS has implemented this year? Are these things that you have liked to see? Were you worried about the start times moving? Because the viewership, I think, has exceeded most people's expectations for the movement.
I wear a lot of hats. It's why it's a hard conversation. It's better if you like specify what you're talking about because I watch as a fan. I watch as a previous broadcaster who has opinions on what should be in broadcast. I
Yeah,
watch
that's
as
why
a
your opinions are interesting.
or as an org owner now, right? Like I have to like think about it. So you can't solve for everything. So I have a lot of thoughts. Is there any particular strains you want me to zoom in on?
All
'Cause
right,
like
well, let's start with the broadcast times because that was a concern, but it seems to be doing relatively well. What were your thoughts about moving the dates and the times, and how have you evaluated it so far?
oh, I think I was very, very skeptical originally when the idea of moving the days came up. When the moving the days came up, kind of like end of spring, I already knew that we were going to be talking about 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. kind of time slot. I knew it was not going to be evening
Obviously,
because
yeah.
EST and Europe not being available, it's just not a decision you would ever make. So I was already thinking about how you're going to get people in the audience, et cetera, et cetera. I will say the most refreshing thing I've found with the change is I love playing on Friday, getting that done, and then being like, oh, there's 3 days of LEC that I can watch at my leisure at a comfortable time. I don't wake up and find out I'm behind. It's not a like match day and we're like scrambling to work out why someone drafted the way they did in the patch earlier that day. I do like the fact that it feels more spaced out. Obviously, LCS takes a bit of an L moving to weekdays compared to weekends, at least in terms of theory. You're like, okay, well, theoretically, we'll have access to less people, et cetera, et cetera. But the old model of the viewer watches all of Europe and then all of North America, or like watches 3 games, like in a sitting, is not realistic. I don't think that's how it goes anymore. I don't have the exact data to like prove this. I've never been like
I
specifically
mean,
presented
expecting
that, but
people to watch 10 straight hours of League of Legends on weekends was a little ridiculous.
there's a reason that Riot has like and ahed about how they present data. I mean, part of it's just sometimes the data is not going up, so obviously you get creative around that. But the other part is like I'm pretty sure average viewing time has gone down over time, which makes perfect sense. Um, the viewership is aged. That part is kind of like common knowledge, and so people have less time. And connected to that, I think it's more common to be like sports where you watch your team play, and that's like the sum of what you do. You don't actually, maybe you watch two teams, like the top teams and your team, but you don't watch all 5 games, which obviously, as we all on this call know, was what Riot wanted. Was that you watched? I'm an LCS fan. I watched the whole LCS broadcast, which I don't think that like 5+ hour chunk is what anybody does anymore. And then this idea of I watch LEC and LCS is like comically, like no one is watching 10 hours in a row. I say no one, obviously
Yeah,
someone
I
in the
did.
comments will get in there and be like,
Yeah.
fuck you, I watched 10 hours. And it's like, great. Your kind is dying. It's
I
like,
even
there's
think
not
there's
that
a
many
reason
people.
that people don't bother to put in the background because I always look for like second and third factors in the analysis. One of the reasons I think naively they might have thought that would work at the beginning, Papa,
But it
is
did, I
because
think. I think it did
LCS
anecdotally.
was the way bigger region, and partly because it had all the streamers. They used to get 20K live viewers. That means some of those are European fans. That means they also want to watch the league. That doesn't exist anymore in the same way. Like those two things are separated. The things are smaller. Like we're just not in the old days, are we?
We're not, and it was novel at the time, and you wanted to watch it all because you never knew if it was going to disappear. Was the LCS a 2013 only product? Like no one could have the insight of where things would go. Now we're at the point where the fucking Challengers Korea broadcast has English. We didn't have anything at that time for LPL. Like it was us doing guerrilla stuff at the time before LPL, and even the first years of LPL weren't covered in English. Obviously, Korea always had an English broadcast, but now there's so much broadcast League of Legends. Now the quality, if you want to be a purist, you know which regions to watch. Obviously, Korea and China. So like the competition for time and the fact that if the average age of the viewer was, let's say, 13, 14, 15 at that time, it's probably 21, 22, 23 now. Just kind of coming up with that number. And there's just much more competition for time. Just like we talked about spring being the better viewership time because there's less competition for your attention. As you get older, you have more things on your plate to be able to carve out time to watch a block of League of Legends, and a block goes from being 10 hours to 1 hour, and that's just the reality of where things are at. So I do like that the broadcast has times to breathe. I think the start time being pitched on 12 o'clock is like the maximum viewership time, and then it being pivoted to 2. That's the part where I'm like, okay, well, I don't know what the data is that supports that change, but it's a crowd pleaser. There was a lot of bad PR at the time, so a crowd pleaser still has its validity. And to your question about viewership, I think the viewership with no host has been very, very good, because I think that Riot did an extremely poor job of advertising the days changing, the time, all of these things. Like, it was just very, very disappointing, and it's something that obviously have given feedback on before, during, and after. But given all of those, the viewership is healthy. Like, people will say it's down, and it's like, if you move any product,
it's actually amazing it's not down.
It goes
more.
down. Like, I'm someone who's like followed professional wrestling a lot of my life, for differing levels of severity in terms of following it. But I'm interested in the business, and there's a lot about TV ratings and stuff like that. That's always big discussion point there, which is very similar to Twitch viewership. And whenever it's like, oh, Raw is being delayed to Tuesday because there's a big football game on Monday night, so they're going to move it, then that creates scenarios where the viewership goes extremely far down because people showed up on Monday to watch it and it's not there. So the fact that they kind of, not secretly, but, covertly moved it to Thursday, Friday, and the viewership was like most of the way good, feels great. Now, in 6 weeks' time, we'll have more of a picture to how much of that was, early season push and new rosters and shine, et cetera, et cetera. But the way it's opened up is far exceeding my expectations, so I'm pretty stoked about that.
I also think that because they did such a bad job advertising it, there's always like a boost at the start of the season when people are hyped about the teams. But I think it's probably going to balance out, because as more people get accustomed to this schedule, I think it'll probably stay about the same, even with the early season boost, right? Because you'll get the stragglers trickling in as they understand the timing and everything better. So, I mean, I think it's actually a very positive change, at least at first, and Riot's theory, at least right now, looks like it was pretty solid.
Just like we're like bigging up FlyQuest and things like that, we are kind of like giving the roses to LCS in week 2, like in week 6, 7, 8.
I mean, when it's
week
the mid
3,
summer season, that's when it's going to be. That's like the doldrums where it becomes really hard to maintain the viewership.
I will just say, subjectively, winning the first game of the day on Friday, getting to watch the rest of the LCS at low stakes and be like, okay, Saturday is my off day. I can watch some LEC if I want or not. Like, that feels subjectively very good. Now, is that actually going to be like affirmed by viewership, which is something that's one of our big mandates and drivers? I need more time to understand, but it feels good so far.
And then, you want to talk about something in LCK?
Oh, hold up. Yes, in just a second. I want his take on the differences in the production quality and what you've seen, because that has also been the other push. And are you happy with that in terms of the way they're presenting your team? Because I think famously, one thing that I repeatedly railed on when you were with 100 Thieves is that they weren't doing a very good job of like representing Sunday's story, for example. And
it's going to be hella political now, but go for it.
Of course.
Well, I feel like I'm less political as I get older.
I think on this topic you will be quite political. I don't think you'll say the broadcast was shit. They never showed us. They cared more about like TSM and Cloud9. Even, I don't think you'll do any of that. So we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong.
I mean, that was one of my biggest internal pushbacks that I would talk about, is that the LCS broadcast for so many years was the story of Bjergsen and Doublelift told again and again and again, so that you could just kind of like chase the most engaged players and like coast off their viewership, like cut off the top, which is boring. Like, my favorite ever Worlds intro to a group stage was 2016 Worlds, where my first Worlds I worked, so obviously some nostalgia there, where they positioned Faker as the kind of like as the, not the enemy per se, but as like the foil to all the new people coming in, of like, this guy's already won
final
multiple
boss
times, the final boss type. And I feel like you should always use your established stars that you built up to a crazy degree to build up your new stars. Then you just have more stars rather than just like,
it's how the UFC does
double
it.
lift. I love them. I love them. I
Yes.
love them. It's like, okay, well, at some
Exactly.
point that's going to get old and people want new names. And I think that, right,
Yes.
the LCS broadcast has done a terrible job of that. I would say recently they've done better. I think that ever since about summer last year, they've gotten better around trying to push new concepts. Maybe it was EG winning with Danny and JoJo that pushed it, but I think that overall it's been trending up. In terms of how they're featuring FlyQuest, I think they've done fine. I watch a lot less of the broadcast now than before, so I don't have the most nuanced take on it. I will say that the changes they've made to broadcast style, making it less ESPN, doing more skits. I get many more casters in my DMs saying like, hey, can we get a player for this? Or like, I had this idea, would this player be up for it based on the personality, you know? Like, you know, people like Emily and Raz and these guys are trying to do creative things. They're making some flops along the way, but they're nailing in other ways. I feel like the talent team and producers they have working the show right now are the most receptive and the most creative they've ever had. And so let's let them get through some good and bad decisions and kind of see how it fleshes out, because I have a very different answer right now than I would have a year and a half ago when I'm like, this broadcast just sucks. I think it's a lot better than it used to be.
Agreed.
What we got? We got more topics. I'm here.
I'm waiting for Monte to finish all these important topics about the broadcast, right? Should we actually talk about people who are good at League of Legends now?
Yes.
You know, half an hour maybe at the end, squeeze it in. Fucking hell. So, okay, one thing I would like to talk about, and the reason I want to talk about it with you, actually, Papa, is because you are actually someone who is known to not be someone who has like, you can have like a strong take, but I don't think you ever, I think you quite very intentionally, you very rarely have a hot take. Like you actually do seem like you want to think about it more. You even, I notice when you're forming your take, you will almost try to like intentionally see all of the sides of it. And so like a bit like when I was talking about the Riot.
I was like that as a caster too, right?
Yeah. Oh, you were, absolutely. See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.